Singapore was one
Jamaica
of those countries.
was never on the path to being a Singapore at any point.
Yes, yes, we were. Go back and look at the go back and look at the backside legacy of Jamaica
Who
and the
owned the
internal backside
backside
legacy.
at that time? Who
No,
owned
no, no,
it?
hold on, hold on. I can't give you I can't give you all the examples right now. Time does not know what I'm saying. Look at our backside legacy. We were poised to do great things based on those initial exports. Right? And we blew it because we allowed the colonial influence, the plantocracy, to take heel and push us where we didn't want to go. What UIC will do is make sure that one, the use of force principle, use of force uh, orders will be properly gazetted so that every individual know the conditions under which they interact with state actors who enforce regulations and laws. Okay? From there, we will make sure that we are able to, one, scrutinize these actions, investigate these actions, because the rights of the citizens are paramount. So when a state actor say, I had to act with violence and use physical force to apprehend this citizen, that state actor's action is scrutinizable. And therefore, it's up to the state to be able to look at that actor's actions and say the force use was appropriate, okay, and it had to be done, and they acted under the right color of law, and so on and so forth. Okay,
How,
but it
how
doesn't
do
mean
you
that.
how do you intend to work with the security forces to do that?
And I'll get to that in a second. So once we have these frameworks, these operational and organizational frameworks, even legal frameworks in place, it is now to implement. Right? So, for example, the UIC has consistently called for the use of force policy to be publicized by the present administration. That has not happened. We have consistently asked that a shooting review board be implemented to review all state shooting. And this review is not for legal liability or jeopardy, but rather operational and organizational outcome to make sure that we're actually acting under the color of law and then learning from it and implementing the lessons, good or bad, in operational training to make sure we're respecting the rights of citizens.
We
So
already
that is
have an
what.
organization to do that. It's called Indicom.
Now, INDECOM was set up to investigate police excesses, particularly police killings. What we're suggesting is a shooting review board that review the operational aspects, the reporting aspects, and of course the circumstances surrounding those shootings, and then using those lessons. So let's say, for example, in an encounter and lethal force, well, let's not say lethal, let's say then the force was employed with less than lethal outcome. And when it is investigated, the law enforcer acted in the right because a challenge was posed. But in employing force, a bystander was injured. That is a beautiful lesson to learn and implement, because now you go back and teach them how to make sure that that level of exposure, that collateral damage doesn't happen. But that doesn't happen in an income situation. They look, is there legal liability? No. Okay, case closed. What we're looking at is more deeper than that. It is a deep dive into the operational aspects, which looks at the framework, the planning, and the execution of an operation of that nature, and then saying, okay, lessons learned, let's implement them, and leave the legality to Indicom to do that. So that's where we are.
Okay. I'm not 100% clear of how you're proposing that it will work, considering that yes, we need to inform the public of their rights, and it's good when people know their rights, but I think also the perpetrators of these incidents ought to have some kind of either punitive measure or something to discourage them from doing things that the persons who are tasked with preserving the law, when they run afoul of the law, there should be some kind of punitive measure.
Yes, there should be, and those already exist. As you said, Indicom. What we need is to detangle the policing system from the political system, where you don't have a security minister going to a police federation meeting and declare that police officers can shoot citizens and the state will provide legal defense. What we need is a commissioner that will act independently of the government of the day. What you have, or what we need, is a commissioner that won't seek to propagandize the nation and join with the leader to divide the country along tribal lines, declaring that you're for the police or against the police. Where officers are standing on the streets and asking individuals, are you for the police or against the police, which have no consequence. What we need is a system of policing where when a justice of the court, a Supreme Court justice, hands down a ruling and declares that I'm sending the ruling to the commissioner for implementation, that when the commissioner gets that ruling, he doesn't call a press conference as an officer of the court and say, I'm not going to follow this ruling, and he's not held in contempt. The system exists, but because of how porous enforcement is, because of how politically aligned the system is with a political appointee as commissioner, we won't see that happen. UIC will change the policing landscape in Jamaica by creating a police service and not a force. It's a total paradigm shift where the rights of the individuals are respected, their right to life, liberty, and property, and the enforcement of the law is equal, it's equitable. That is what we will do. But at the same time, we have to pick aspects right now that don't work and show how they can work from an international policing perspective. And shooting review boards are standard, and they go along with shooting training, where the ruling from the review board goes to the training school, and that is used in the various training scenarios. And that is why there's training, the training has changed from blank round shooting to more intelligent or ICT-driven shooting scenarios, where you can now pinpoint the technical errors in the use of force with firearms. For example, I remember when we had a commissioner that said, we're losing ballistic evidence because police are using high-power weapons to engage their combatants, let's call it that, on the streets. It's creating collateral damage, and we're losing ballistic evidence. What I'm going to do is give them training and then reduce the caliber weapons that they use. And the entire police federation took to the streets about it. The entire police force was up in arms, that they were left to be killed. But here we are. When you look at the UK, for example, who have very stringent gun laws, they have a very tiny subset of officers that are trained and deployed with firearms. And those officers use a 9mm caliber submachine gun. Okay? And it doesn't make them any less lethal because they have what is called special weapons and tactics training. We have vehicles so branded, but no operations so planned. That needs to change in Jamaica because the commissioner don't believe that the force should be accountable to the people because the police force, policing in Jamaica has a 307-year-old history. That was the genesis of policing in Jamaica. Jamaica is 60 years old. Do the math. What was happening for the other 200 and odd years?
Well, we know that this is almost universal, especially in post-colonial countries where they were the slave catchers. They were the slave catchers. Then they transitioned into keeping the former slaves in line, and they transitioned into what we have now.
In Jamaica, it was worse. There were more than the slave catchers. Ask Paul Boog, we can't. So it was much worse. And the Rastas in Carl Gardens and the Rastas in Pinnacle and all the other abused minority will tell you what that represents.
But still, many of these people are some of the strongest supporters of the police. So
and there you go. And that is it. Jamaicans are believers in law and order. What we're not believers in is the type of policing that we're still getting in the modern age. And that is what the UIC prefers to change. Right? That's why the UIC has systematically said that we will build 3 forensic suites throughout the island, where autopsies will not pile up or will be done on time, ballistic investigations on time, proper reporting, proper chain of custody, etc. from these 3 suites. Right? We will move to high-tech investigative tools that will be ICT driven, so that we can track persons. For example, one of the things I like to talk about is what is referred to as a sonic mic. So when we deploy special operations team to an area and say, go have a curfew, and they lock the place down, and you hear allegations of mistreatment, beatings, and even shootings, right? We need to get to a point where we can deploy that team, right? They get to the community, they secure a perimeter, they deploy their ballistic mics, they deploy their tandem drones, and they deploy their armored vehicles. And when the first shot is fired, the sonic mic picks up the general direction, Those drones can now be targeted to those directions, and then operation be targeted to that specific space. You will now be able to go and collect ballistic evidence. Okay, you need to go and you can now target individuals because when they have left the scene, they're left with facial recognition, heat signatures, etc. You can track them to where they're going and go there and collect GSR evidence. So you'll be able to convict persons for crimes they have committed without abusing the public. We need to get to that space. Yes, it's not free. Yes, it costs money. But what is the alternative? Do we
I
keep
think
abusing our
cost is the
citizens?
least of our concerns. I mean, it
Correct.
sounds good. I think culture is more of a concern than cost. We the long-term benefits would justify the cost. But I think that in Jamaica, our police force come from our communities. And in Jamaica, we have a kind of culture, as you say, we are a law and order people, and we have very colonial mindsets as to what this law and order looks like, right? And so that to me is much more of a hurdle than the cost.
True, true. And we will conquer that culture by educating persons as to what the better outlook is like for us. Employing new methods. And as the UIC likes to say, new people, new thinking, and new mindset. So we're changing the paradigm. We're showing persons that it can be done better. We don't have to accept it. And yes, there are people that kill them, yes, because the justice system doesn't work. So these persons are trapped in a mindset that the state has to execute revenge on their behalf for there to be justice. That's not justice. A true system of justice, as it was created in the ancient days, is a system that allows the victims and the perpetrator to be in a controlled space where testimony can be gathered, evidence reviewed, and a verdict by a jury of your peers or a judiciary can be had, and the determination of guilt or innocence is then used to further actions from there. So we want to make sure we create the best investigative teams. We want to use the best investigative tools as available from the times and make sure that we're giving our citizens a fighting chance, whether they're guilty or innocent. There are persons who are guilty by association and find themselves at the end of lethal sanction. That is untenable and unheard of. There are persons who are incarcerated and can't see a judge, not because the judge is lazy and don't want to work, but because the system doesn't allow for proper record keeping and proper transition from incarceration to a hearing. UIC, we change all of that. For example, we don't believe that the constabulary should be keeping persons in custody. As required by law, persons in the custody of the constabulary should be taken before a judge for bail to be heard forthwith. After that, they should be remanded to the care of the Department of Corrections. And the Department of Corrections will have specific mandate, which is highlighted in our international treaty obligations to keep and care and to rehabilitate. And the UIC will fund that activity through the common taxes that we levy to make sure that we're doing things right, we're doing things that are best for our persons, and we're not breeding resenters, haters, and hardened criminals.
So one of the this is my final question. When I listen, when I go through the manifesto and I listen to you now, yes, we have a culture, but also some of the strongest supporters of this kind of law enforcement is the business community, as you earlier mentioned, PSOJ and so on. We have an interesting business community in Jamaica, and a lot of our laws are influenced by this business community. And I am not sure how UIC intends to get buy-in from this business community that seems to be the driver. Certainly, many Jamaicans think so, that they are the driver of our economy. How do you intend to get buy-in from this subset of people? Bearing also in mind what happened in the 70s when Michael Manley tried to push through his quote unquote radical agenda. I don't think it was radical, but that was what many people thought at the time. Yeah, how does UIC intend to get over that hurdle?
These business owners are also individuals. And Jamaica is in a precarious place. where the PSOJ oligarchy, who was the plantocracy, who was the slave owners before that, continued to wield influence because of their ability to lobby the government through their special interest funding of the two colonial parties. The UIC isn't so funded. So we are where the outline is because we speak like this. We're not trying to turn criminals loose to plunder these businesses. What we rather do is look at it as optimizing the citizenry so that we have more productive workers able to work in these enterprises. Now, yes, we have hardened criminals, so let's not pretend that we live in a utopia. Those hardened criminals, there's a system to deal with them. And those who require lethal sanction, the state will act thereof. But we must be one, subject to scrutiny in those actions to make sure that it's not something we're taking willy-nilly, it's not a flight of fancy. And of course, these actions need to be properly outlined, vetted, and managed. It can't be a political laissez-faire situation. So these businesses, we will approach them as individuals, highlight these things to them, show them the upside, show them the examples of these systems working, and give them the opportunity to be a part of it. But we're confident that the 63% of Jamaicans that see the incestuous intermingling between the PSOJ and the elected representatives and are so resentful of this incest will choose to support the UIC's activity. And therefore, buying from the business is not necessary, but buying from the individual is what we're looking for. So
Well,
if
you
you own a
need buy-in
business,
from the people who basically run your economy, don't you?
right? But here's the thing. And that's why I said buying from the individual is what we're looking for. So when they see the productivity that is coming, I'm sure they will support us, even if they don't support us in the initial. And those who have moral questions, when they listen to our arguments, I'm sure they'll find it in their hearts to say, our fellow Jamaicans deserve a second chance to optimize. And we will appeal to them as such.
I think that's a very optimistic view. History does not support that position that you have. Based on what has happened before, that's a very optimistic view. It's to me, it's based on an assumption that you're dealing with people who want the best interests for Jamaica. I don't necessarily think so. Um,
So let me ask you this before you go further, Ms. Clark. If the ordinary, well, not the ordinary, but the colonial businessman out there that is looking on and that think unbecoming of a Jamaican, of an ordinary Jamaican, when he sees the buy-in from the 63%, don't you think he'll want to think twice? Or she?
I
I think so.
No, I don't think so. The policies that, for example, again, I'm using the 70s as the historical context. There was a lot of buy-in from the masses of the Jamaican public for the policies of Michael Manley. His economic policies were popular among the local people, and many of his policies were very popular. They were not popular among the minority business people. And the minority business people garnered influence and had overseas interests who got themselves involved in this situation and put a lot of pressure to bear. And so that's where my questioning comes from, in that the I feel that this position is a gross underestimation of how far people will go to protect capital.
Look at it this way. We're also informed by history. And we are and while we're not a supporter of the mentioned group, we know that those persons who pushed hard against it later capitulated when they realized what they were losing and returned to a position of holding their capital sway over the heads of the people and the government. So we know that
Yeah, when they were assured that their capital was safe.
so we know that they are swayable. And the UIC is a group that and while we're optimistic in our view, we're also grounded in the fact that we need to be able to leverage the situation that we have and the positives that we have and will create to get the desired outcome. So while we speak optimistically, we are grounded in what we need to do. We know what we need to do. And let's say because words don't come right now doesn't mean that it won't come. Our president, for example, is shrewd at negotiating contracts at our level. I've had a few brushes myself, not to blow my own horn, but we know what needs to happen. We'll make it happen because Jamaicans deserve better. And we'll make sure that we'll separate ourselves from the neo-colonialists that currently rules this country to show the people that it's time to elevate ourselves. 60 years is too long to wait and for development to come and for us to be told that, oh, Jamaica this, or it takes time. Singapore did it in 20 years. Why didn't we do it in 30 or even 40?
Because we're not Singapore.
Exactly. But we had the same kind of resources, just the wrong people in leadership.
I really detest the Singapore comparison because if what we know about the post-colonial structures, this was never a possibility for Jamaica.
Yes,
Jamaica
yes,
being
it
a
was.
Singapore was never a possibility. It
Yes, it
never
was. And here's
was.
what. Yes, it was. And here's why. It was a possibility when Marcus Garvey was in the picture. And that is why the UIC clings to his legacy so dearly. He was forced out of the system by the colonial masters in collusion with the two foreign
The
colonial parties
history
who
of
insisted on the
Singapore and the
history.
history of Jamaica are very different, and it was never. There were countries that came out of colonialism that were earmarked, I dare say, earmarked for certain
No.
structures to provide the labor, and there were certain countries that were earmarked to provide products and services and so on. There were different
Singapore,
purposes for different
Singapore was
countries.
one. Singapore was one
Jamaica
of those
was
countries.
never ever going was never on the path to being a Singapore at any point.
Yes, yes, we were. Go back and look at the go back and look at the backside legacy of Jamaica.
Who
The
owned the
internal backside
bauxite at
legacy.
that time? Who
No,
owned
no, hold on,
it?
hold on, hold on. I can't give you, I can't give you all the examples right now. Time does not know what I'm saying. Look at our backside legacy. We were poised to do great things based on those initial exports. Right? And we blew it because we allowed the colonial influence, the plantocracy, to take heel and push us where we didn't want to go. Singapore wasn't one of those countries earmarked for success. It was a ragtag city state that was rife with civil conflict that was expected to be used just like us. But they took the road of the what would you call it now? The scientific discoveries, business mindedness, and repositioned their country quietly, slowly. And we didn't. The UIC is a friend to all and an enemy to none. And if you want to revel in success, like Singapore, if you want a highly educated workforce, just like Singapore, then we will leverage what we have. We will change our education system. We will change our justice system. We will change the complete constitution and political outlook to make sure that we can optimize our people and take Jamaica in a better direction, where your corporate success is assured and you're not missing anything. As a matter of fact, you'll be even richer than you are now. You'll have a workforce that can actually produce instead of you become belabored with the liability of employed unqualified persons or underqualified persons. We will optimize and actualize people. So that is what the UIC is offering.
Okay, Mr. Wright, thank you so much for your time. This has been very interesting. And I want to thank you so much for expounding on the UIC's mission and mandate. And I hope that we can have a talk again soon. But I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. I appreciate you taking the time to have us.